Hello, welcome to our professional development video on engaging with complex texts using a strategy called Don't Jump In. My name is Mariah Morris. I'm our director of Orange County Schools, and I'm excited to share this strategy with you as we work to scaffold our students into complex texts. Just as a reminder, we are embarking on this video series of bite-sized chunks of professional development that share a strategy a week with you on how to help your students engage with complex texts while we work to roll out the HMH into reading and into literature curriculum. Our first video focused all on pre-reading our texts with the focus of that student-text relationship. Our second video was all about building student efficacy with a strategy called Let Your Students In on the Secret. Our third strategy focused on the jigsaw method, which is an interactive collaborative strategy that has been proven to boost reading comprehension. And then today's strategy is Don't Jump In. In case you missed last week's strategy about how to use the jigsaw method, you can scan this QR code and it will take you to the recording link that is housed on YouTube. So as we get started today, I want to recenter ourselves back on Scarborough's reading rope. What we know about how our children learn to read is that there are different complex processes that happen in their brains simultaneously as they work to fluently read a text and understand what they have read. The bottom part of the rope focuses on those foundational skills like phonological awareness, decoding, and sight recognition. The top part of the rope focuses on what we call language comprehension, and that's our students' ability to understand their background knowledge, the vocabulary, the literacy knowledge, language structure, and verbal reasoning. What we know about language comprehension strands are that the background knowledge and vocabulary strand are the most instrumental in helping ensure that a student is able to comprehend a text. When a student has good background knowledge and good control of the vocabulary within a text, they are much more likely to be able to read and comprehend what they've read. So today's strategy centers on these two elements of Scarborough's reading rope as we work to intentionally provide scaffolds that support our students' ability to use background knowledge and vocabulary effectively throughout the text. We do this because we understand that we want our students to be reading grade level complex texts, but sometimes their skills have deficits in them that make this challenging. So our role as the classroom teacher is to provide this differentiation that increases complexity as we go through the lesson or through the unit or through the semester so that they're able to reach mastery in these incremental bite-sized pieces. Today's scaffolding focuses all on what happens before you read the text. So with that jigsaw strategy from last week, we were focusing on what happened during reading the text. Today's focus is right here at the beginning of the text, that first step into providing students with pre-teaching so that they have a good idea of the background knowledge and the vocabulary before they ever enter the text. So with that, we will jump right in to our strategy, which is Don't Jump In. So today's strategy is called Don't Jump In. And in essence, it just completely embodies the whole idea of going slow to go fast. So with Don't Jump In, the idea is that you don't just hand students a text and expect them to jump in and be successful. The whole premise of Don't Jump In is that background knowledge is essential for reading comprehension. This is not debated in the world of literacy. There are a lot of things that are debated with how we teach students to read, and this is not one of them. In the research world, there is near consensus that background knowledge is crucial to having a student be able to comprehend what they read. The more you know about a topic, the easier it is to read the text, understand the text, and retain the text. Different research studies have shown that background knowledge plays an enormous role in our students' ability to understand comprehension. So with that idea, we launch into this idea that in order for our students to comprehend a story or a text, they have to have what we call a threshold of knowledge about the topic. We can call it domain-specific knowledge or topical knowledge, but without this knowledge, it becomes difficult for our students to construct a meaningful mental model of what this text is about. And so prior to giving students the text, it's important for us to take a step back and build this conceptual understanding of what the text is about. We as teachers can front load the ideas behind the text and the important vocabulary words that help create this conceptual knowledge so that our students have this working knowledge and understanding of what it is they're about to read. And that is so important and so crucial that we slow down and we build this opportunity for our students before they read the story. So let's talk about ways we can build a conceptual knowledge. Well, the first thing is literally not to jump right in. Like, don't just get started reading the text. It's important to do something that we call building a comprehension canopy. If you think about what a canopy is, it could be a man-made canopy that goes over like an outdoor picnic area or a playground to provide shade for that area. It could also be like the picture here, a canopy of trees that provide a certain sense of shade and habitat for what is underneath it. And in this case, it is another metaphor for providing a ability to overlay a framework of conceptual knowledge onto the student before they read the story. So a comprehension canopy provides meaningful context around the content through which they're going to read. It gives students this framework and enough background knowledge to be able to actually engage in it. What we do know is that a student's background knowledge on a particular topic is impacted by many different factors in that student's life. It could be that student's own interests. They could be experts on certain topics and know nearly little to no information about others. It's also impacted by cultural traditions within that family. If we have a student who comes from another culture or country, they may have a vast background understanding about certain topics that our American students do not. However, they might lack certain cultural ideas and understandings about things that some of our students sitting in our classroom are born knowing and understanding practically. We also know that within our own American culture, our students are impacted by background knowledge based on different factors such as their socioeconomic status or their race or their ethnicity or even their gender in different capacities. So it's important for us to not assume that our students understand something because it might be culturally familiar to ourselves. Each of us brings our own culture into our classroom, and those are areas and topics that we might have vast experiences with when it comes to background knowledge. However, we have to work as detectives to figure out what our students know and understand prior to giving a text. So how do we build a comprehension canopy? There are 3 steps that you can use in your instruction before you give a text that will help build this, what we call comprehension canopy. The first is to establish a purpose for your students when reading a text. The second is to ask an overarching question prior to reading the text that can help center your students and their focus while engaging with that text. And then the third is to prime initial background knowledge. Now we're going to go through each of these in a little bit more depth, but these are the 3 steps that I recommend that you do when building a comprehension canopy. The first, establishing a purpose. Reading with a purpose means that you teach your students to approach text with a specific goal in mind. When possible, ask your students to read a text from a specific point of view. And this will definitely depend on what text you're bringing to them. In the classroom, when our students are given reasons to read, then they are able to set forth during their reading with a very focused and deliberate intent. It's really important that these purposes match what they experience in real world situations. So if there is an informational text that the students can apply to life outside of school, set a purpose that matches that real world situation. Establishing a purpose when your students are reading helps students stay focused and engaged while reading. It also gives them a mission so that the comprehension can be reinforced. We talked a lot about self-efficacy back in our second video that was titled Let Your Students In on the Secret. And student efficacy can be a huge factor in overall success in the lesson. It's important that we frame the learning for our students and help them understand what we want them to know at the end of the text. That can be established by setting a purpose for how they're going to read and interact with the text. The second part of building a canopy of comprehension is to ask an overarching question before your students read the text. After you frame the learning for your students, you can then tell them that while they read the text, you want them to focus on a big idea or maybe a general understanding. I've listed 4 possible questions. You wouldn't give all 4 of these at once. You would just select one of these questions. What does the text say? How does the text work? What does the text mean? Or what does the text inspire you to do? A lot of times we want our students to get to these bigger understandings that are more symbolic or that have a deeper meaning and a higher depth of knowledge about the text. And we forget that first we have to start with the literal. First, our students just need to connect to literally what the text is saying. When we front load this overarching question for our students at the beginning, we're telling them, this first read, we just want you to understand what the text says. Or while you read this, I just want you to tell me, what does this text inspire you to think about or inspire you to do? Think about questions that literally help the student just connect to the big understanding of the story. The last part of building a comprehension canopy is to prime your students' initial background knowledge. Remember, our students come to us with all different types of background knowledge based on who they are and how they operate in the world. This is a great thing for our classroom and should be really brought to life as we celebrate the diversities within our classroom. But it also means that we can't make assumptions about what our students do or do not know. There's going to be some texts that are more familiar to some of our students than others. And it's our responsibility as the teacher to prime all of our students' initial background knowledge of the topic so that they have a conceptual map that they can use when they're reading the story. For our students who struggle with foundational reading skills, sometimes getting through the words are hard enough. So imagine doing that with a topic that's unknown to them and also having to build a conceptual knowledge of that topic while they're struggling to read the literal words on the page. We can help our students front load these texts by creating these conceptual ideas within their minds so that they have an idea of what they are reading while they read it. So in order to prime our initial background knowledge, I have some different suggestions for you to consider. The first one is to pre-teach the important words in the story through this idea of teaching them in categories. So the example I have here is very elementary. This would be for our little kids. But for example, imagine you could say something as simple as this. I'm going to say the following words: strawberries, bananas, papayas, and pineapples. They're all an example of, and the students would understand, fruit. Because maybe the story is all about papayas, and that's a cultural reference that the students are going to understand the text. Our students will probably already know the words strawberries and bananas, so layering in papayas gives them something to latch onto as they build their conceptual knowledge of this fruit. That's a very simple understanding, but you can do this for a lot of other things as well. Categories of objects begin to develop what we call concepts. And these concepts will help create conceptual maps for our students to build out their background knowledge and also their language and vocabulary development. So pre-teach the important words of the stories from the text by helping your students categorize them and fit them into categories that they already are familiar with. Another strategy you can use to prime initial background knowledge is to use contrasts and comparisons in your descriptions. Another example that is very elementary would be if you're giving students these contrast comparison puzzlers like, is an artichoke a type of fruit? Why is it or why is it not a kind of fruit? Puzzlers help children think outside of the box and the immediate context through which you're discussing. It helps them consider the reasoning behind the contrasts and the comparison. This helps deepen their knowledge of whatever it is you're studying. Again, this is a really elementary example. However, you can extend this to older, more advanced concepts that you're studying as well. Think about how you could introduce different types of governments in social studies or with a historical text in ELA by asking things like, are queens and kings examples of a democratic system of government? Why or why not? And having students have to categorize and put this idea of kings and queens and monarchs into what they know about democracy can really help them branch out and create this conceptual idea of government before you enter a text. The third strategy that you can use to prime initial background knowledge is to encourage topic-focused wide reading. So here you will select a text, but you'll offer students a lot of different types of texts that demonstrate a breadth of knowledge about a topic prior to reading instead of depth. So for example, you might, before you get into a much harder, more complex text that's in our curriculum, like into reading or into literature, that studies something that might be very domain focused, like maybe photosynthesis with plants. You might give students a day where they're able to digest as much information at a fairly superficial rate on plants and on the survival of plants and how plants grow and flourish. And with this, you're not going to go really deep in the knowledge and get into a lot of like content specific vocabulary words. Rather, students will read as many different passages in text and poems and interact with even like multimedia examples on one particular topic. Helping students get this deeper knowledge and expertise on the topic will help them be able to encounter the harder, more complex text when you're ready to roll that out. And then lastly, don't be afraid to embrace multimedia. We have so much at our fingertips, and we all know that, especially after our remote learning with COVID. But this can really be used to help us front load initial background knowledge. We know that learning it comes to life when students are able to engage in direct learning experiences that are hands-on and interactive. Think about when you take students on a field trip and they're able to actually like get into the topic and learn in a really authentic way. Unfortunately, we can't do that for every single story we read. However, we do have a lot of our fingertips that can help students embrace this inquisitive, inquiry-based excitement for the topic. And while multimedia will never replace those hands-on field experiences, we can use them to help motivate and engage our students in forming a knowledge base around the topic. So embracing multimedia and videos and music and pictures and Google Maps and all of those things are a great way to help build background knowledge about a topic. So as we come to a close of this short video that really focuses on the strategy that we call Don't Jump In, I just want to share with you this quote. Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I will spend the first 4 sharpening my axe. And this, I think, really captures the essence of going slow to go fast and not just jumping into a text and racing through it. When we're able to slow down and build what we call a comprehension canopy, we're building out this framework of conceptual knowledge for the student before they read the story. What the research tells us is that students' background knowledge is so vitally important to help them understand the text that they're reading, that spending this time front-loading important background concepts as well as vocabulary is time really well spent. And it will help them ultimately be able to engage with the text at a deeper level and be able to successfully understand the complex text that you are showing them. So thank you for tuning in today. I hope you're able to pick up something along the way, and reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns. Thank you so much.